Okay, hello everyone. Today is January the 22nd of the year 2023. This is the Extinctionati meeting number 133. We have three members there today so far. One of them is late, and we might get other guests arriving later. There was a rough agenda that was offered there, and there's several people have put different things. I said that I was talking about a tribute to Lord Hugh on the coming anniversary of his death. Then there was Going South, who posted suggestions in the comments about the pandemic, the globalist fascist state, and nature fascism. So there was a lot of things. I won't go into details because we can pick them up as we go. There we can start, I suppose. I didn't have any music for today. Sorry, I was not prepared. I thought someone else would do the usual. Actually, we haven't got music for the last couple of meetings. We should maybe return to that. It was nice to have something familiar when we start our meetings. Anyway, Going South, maybe or Confed, both of you interacted on the comments on Reddit about a few points. Would you like to start?
How about you, Jussi? Do you have something?
Well, thanks for the introduction, Inishman. Much appreciated. And I know it's maybe a smaller crew today. I wanted to join, certainly kind of looking, thinking about the anniversary of Hugh leaving us, and just kind of reviewing a few of the old videos, which were fantastic. But no, Going South, I know you had some great questions, or comments, kind of discussion, moving through 3 points on the thing. I think that's what Sophie was introducing.
Yeah, I'll look it up.
Certainly happy to kind of chime along. I think there's some interesting stuff, especially on that third point, but it's worth maybe working through point 1 and 2 to get there. But no, just, as far as things right now, well, the world is the world, and it sounds like weather is crazy where you guys are.
Oh yeah, we can say that again. So let's see. So the first point is about the pandemic, and we are currently at this moment looking into some stuff from Germany, which we don't really know if we can believe or not believe. Not a really new feeling over these past 2-3 years. It's kind of, what the fuck are we supposed to believe, right? But other than that, from the now almost institutionalized leaking process in big tech in America, we get like Facebook files and Twitter files every other day or week, and it's kind of coming out in the open that there was a money channel for the development of the famous virus, and that's kind of turning into a given, and then it's up to crazy people like us to figure out why and what were their motivations for doing things. I kind of have a principle that when somebody speaks or has a new blog post or whatever, or they do other things like profitable things, I kind of think that that's always sort of the basic. If somebody creates a crisis that forces people to buy a lot of products from that actor, then that's kind of default. So I don't go very much into people who just want to become famous or rich or something. I think many times there's something more than that when big things happen. So so in that, because I do think we have to get out the big world map and look at geopolitics when it's about global pandemics and things, which play out differently in Asia, from America to Europe and Africa, India. So it kind of goes into the big sort of game, the big chessboard kind of geopolitics game. That's kind of my at least my focus, and what I think is the most interesting thing about the pandemic.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, great observations. I think your principle is totally, right on in so many cases, and I also think that there's a principle of don't let any good disaster go to waste.
Yeah.
Anytime a disaster emerges, all kinds of at least somewhat malevolent people are jockeying to make a buck off of it, get further control off of it, and take advantage of it. So many times these things can be emergent or could be caused, but the results are the same, and the powerful use their power to continue to get more power. With every shift, that's an opportunity, but that doesn't say anything about causation. Of course, it could be any number of things, and we may never know a bunch.
Can I
yeah.
inject? I just remember a key point from one of the spaces I listened to on Twitter, and basically you're taking a BS4 level, that biological safety, BS. So you're taking a BS4 level biological agent, and you are handling that in a BS2 level biological facility, which is that one over in China, right? So I don't suppose you or any of us know about level 4 security and level 2 security for biological agents and research, but it's kind of like level 4 security is very high security, and level 2 security is very low. So what this guy was trying to say by that is that the American program to gain of function, improve this particular virus, they had chosen a low security, level 2 security lab in China for doing that, which is almost like saying that, yeah, they knew it was going to get away from that lab, get out of that lab. It's kind of obvious or child's play if you, from all the 10,000 biological labs in the world, you choose a level 2 security lab for this specific coronavirus research, right? So I thought that was interesting. I don't know what to make of it, but
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of skullduggery, and I would not put it past the U.S., of course. Just before we started recording, Sophie brought up an interesting thing about the German health minister. And, I think it was interesting just to pick up a thread on that. My understanding, and this is only what I've heard just now, is that the German health minister is announcing that people who've suffered COVID may have a whole bunch of long-running impacts and changes undermining their health. And of course, there's, some people are concerned about the vaccine doing something similar. But the point that I didn't pick up on before the call that I think is really important and relevant that was mentioned is the impact of fear, stemming from these kind of proclamations. And I think, I don't know the context of this announcement or, how people are receiving this, like what the public concern is necessarily in Europe or in Germany. But, there's this complicated thing where it might be important to announce any emerging science if it's sound only, of course, that people may suffer further health implications, but the way that's done and how it's received may also provoke fear and division and separation. As just, I think, as you were saying, Sophie, as a way to kind of prod the public into compliance and, constant fear about the outside world. Certainly that serves some people, product manufacturers and, centralized governance. So I just thought that was really interesting. I wanted to kind of call out, of course, any big corporation wouldn't want, and any, their toadies at governments wouldn't want any disaster to go to waste. But in addition to that, there's the nature of these proclamations and announcement, how they kind of weigh on the public mind and how that may cause groups to form and do bad things or just be extremely obedient to a terrible cause. So I just thought that was really interesting and worth calling out.
Yeah, thanks for that. But you know what? While you were talking, I was perusing through my notes and through the bookmarks, and I actually can't find this declaration of this German health minister anymore. It's funny, I read it today or yesterday or yesterday, I can't remember, and it's just disappeared. I can't find it in any agency or any German or European thing. It's kind of vanished. That's quite interesting because it adds to the mystery and to the what we're talking about. To the
Yeah.
how we can get swallowed into these things you don't know. You see that's why I'm a bit reluctant to follow the daily news too much, and I like to take my time and sit back a bit and wait for it to simmer a bit and disappear or not disappear. But like when you make let things float up to the surface after you've been swirling the thing, and then you'd see things that are really staying, and they might be in the background, but who are we really in front of all this information onslaught from Reddit, from YouTube, from all the mainstream medias? And actually, both of you seem to be very au fait of what's happening. What would be your technique of sifting through the news, and with all the what do you do? I'd be very interested in that.
It's kind of the holistic approach, because I just mentioned the mass hysteria that you see alluded to. So if you look at the whole picture of this thing, because sometimes you run into kind of cul-de-sacs or the road stops when you look into the money trail and how the virus was made and stuff. But if you complete that picture with the way that they scare the fuck out of everyone, with pumping these numbers for infections every day on the screen, and also with moving in very fast to censor everything people said about it on their Facebooks and stuff, and going in and actively destroying Facebook groups for victims and people talking to each other after their experiences with the vaccine and everything. If you look at the full picture there, it's kind of less innocent. And it's no longer a picture of governments that were completely confused and had no idea what to do, because they knew exactly what they wanted to do when it comes to silencing regular people, like us. I'm not saying we're regular, but you know what I'm saying. So they kind of had a roadmap for what they wanted to do from very, very early. In fact, I remember that before they were even willing to call it a pandemic, they already had a plan for an infodemic from the WHO, from the World Health Organization. So they knew if they say that they have no idea how to handle this and fight this pandemic, they knew exactly what they were going to do towards the people, towards ordinary people, and how to direct them 24/7 and scare the fuck out of everybody.
Yeah, and I yeah, that's totally true. I mean, you can there are some great videos floating around that I think were used as to make people concerned about the nature of propagandistic efforts. But those videos, I think, that I'm referring to are, unfortunately taken out of context too. This is a complicated situation. And, I think your question, Sophie, it's a great one. Like, how does one kind of suss out information? And it's a challenge. It's a lifelong journey. Because the bottom line is, for better or for worse, there are huge swaths of the public that cannot discern between fact and opinion, or between, what's reliable information and what is not. What is someone trying to be a demagogue and take advantage of you versus someone who is trying to help the public. The public cannot understand that. And we could argue the merits of that situation, like it goes to the root of the nature of the state and its corporate benefactors, and the kind of inculcation that I think our societies are working to create in order to elevate individuals in power. It's into the fabric of society in a very deep and inherent way that is really challenging. But so that's kind of fundamentally evil. But across the board, there are good people working in there, and there are bad people working in there. And being able to kind of suss between the two is a really challenging and kind of lifelong endeavor. I think it's lifelong because just even in my short life, it's been just amazing to see how radically the media landscape has changed. Just how advanced, techniques of kind of influence and information control have become, and just how all-encompassing the nature of media is. It just wallpapers our minds. It's incredible, especially if you don't take an active approach to kind of figuring it out and dealing with it. So, for example, the reason why a lot of these, World Health Organization and other folks feel that they that it's okay for them to weigh in and do heavy censorship is because real people will die. Real people die every day based on the issues that they deal with. They're already playing with human lives, sometimes innocent, but unfortunately misled, misguided people who don't know what's going on. They haven't taken a science class in their lives, and thousands and thousands of people will die based on the decisions they make. So they feel the moral authority to shut down Facebook groups, and whether that's good or bad is complicated and depends on the case, and, is part of a fundamentally kind of evil enterprise in my view. But it is a complex reality, and many things are true all at once. And I think it's important to be, to be really brave and kind of hold your opposition's viewpoint, to try to take in all perspectives all at once, in order to kind of reach a balanced perspective on these things. But, I think the question that you kind of asked originally is like, how does one try to figure out what's true and what's not true in the world? And, whole courses could be taught on this. It's really challenging because the influence operations that want to kind of pitch you on half truths and truths that benefit them and misleading, manipulative truths or falsehoods are constantly evolving and really, really high tech. I mean, it's just amazing. We have, in America alone, we have hundreds of schools of marketing and advertising that run psychological studies that tap into your fears and your deep-seated emotions and all the alien cortex, rough edges, and find ways to play on those and manipulate them. Just like the nature of disease research goes hand in hand with creating bioweapons. The nature of understanding the psychology around marketing to sell people products goes hand in hand with manipulating them. But
so
yeah,
that's a very,
Go ahead.
very complicated question, and I think we touched on it like 2 weeks ago or something. But just to take the last part of my first point that we started out with, it's about strategic time-delayed truth as a case of weaponized Chronos time. This is a very simple, very simple question, and my favorite example is the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline in the Baltic Sea, because we all know it was most likely an anti-Russian power like England or America blowing it up. But the point about strategic time delay of the truth is that okay, uh, country A did it, but they're not forthcoming informing everybody that they did it, right? So they will declassify it, let's say 2025 or something, when the war is either lost or won for their side, and then they'll say, yeah, we did that, and I think it's a greater theme through human history that we allow people to be secretive, nations to be secretive about things, and there is a huge there's a huge upside for the party that is lying or that is being quiet. Another wartime example is the lies of Colin Powell in the UN when he lied about Iraq being full of weapons of mass destruction in east, south, west, and north of Iraq. And these things win wars. They allow for huge transports of troops and military equipment into a war that wasn't necessary for the stated reasons. Then we go into peacetime after those events, after those sabotage or lying events, and it kind of looks like it's legal. It's kind of legalized to lie about something that is eventually going to kill hundreds of thousands of people. In America, I think the New York Times and Washington Post and stuff, they came out and said, "Yeah, that was wrong. Our newspaper took part in creating a mass hysteria to go to war against an quote unquote innocent country like Iraq, like nobody is innocent." Yeah. And then there's nobody standing trial, you know, for for causing those hundreds of thousands of deaths. I think even millions in Iraq, if I remember correctly. It's kind of okay. Yeah, we were fooling around and we said some things, right? So I think that's interesting. How managing when you come out with the true story is a military advantage, and how that kind of makes all of human history and endeavor lying and deceitful, because in order to still be a mighty military power for the next endeavor, you kind of have to shut up about the real true storylines in between the wars. So that means that just because we have a military and wars happening now and then, everything has to be a lie. Uh, at least that's how it feels when you're standing in the middle of the lie
Oh
all
yeah.
the time. Yeah.
I mean, I hate to say it, I think it's far worse than that. you know, it's you're being so generous.
Thank you.
I think that like if you look at the history of U.S. military interventions, there's only been a handful of years in the past 100 years that we have not been at war with somebody. It's just incredible. But you know, a great phrase that I love is that history is just a justification of the current status quo. The people who have the power to tell the history today do it only because they tell it in a way that justifies their power. You know, it's a story that codifies the status quo. And I think it's really interesting to think about, like, okay, well, what's required to be revealed and what is not required to be revealed. And maybe things were different at some past point in the history of the United States, but certainly since the 20s, they'll only reveal what they are compelled to reveal. Any legality is just a mask, a red herring over the nature of power, which will force them to come clean or not, depending on public engagement. And I think of two political terms that, I'm just kind of reminded of through this conversation. One is called a limited hangout. And I think this was really made famous during the Nixon years. When you have a truth like, say, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, the way you kind of soften the blow and get away with it first is you do a limited hangout. You allow a limited amount of the information, a fact about it, but not the whole thing, not the whole truth, to kind of hang out first. The public gets aware of it and they become familiar with it. And it's not as bad as the whole truth, which has been kept from them. And then by the time, more of the truth comes out, it's already old news. And slowly you can kind of allow the truth to seep out in a way that doesn't inflame the public and make them grab their pitchforks. And then a second term is called a soft landing. This is, again, a political term where you kind of let portions of the truth, or like, you state it once, then you kind of delay any follow-ups, then you create a commission and they study it and they have kind of a murky report that you argue over for a year or two. And it creates a process over time which blunts the effect of the truth. And the key thing about these kind of propagandistic techniques is that there are whole textbooks written on this stuff. I mean, they have been studying how to conduct these kinds of, mind shaping operations for hundreds of years. It's baked into the nature of, a society, a state, and an economy that allows some to live so well at the expense of others. It's a age-old practice. Now, state of the art.
Sorry to interrupt you, but to come
Oh,
back
you're great.
come back to my question, I was wondering, because you too, Sewell, I think you mentioned, Confed, that you had been in journalism in some way, and you going south seem to have a very long experience of being on different network, different what do you call them, social medias like YouTube and Twitter and these things. So you've been in that for quite a while. I'm a bit outside the that sort of thing, and I'm very curious to see what two people like you do in the day, like when they want to be informed. What do you peruse the mainstream? Do you have special I don't know, sites and things that you look at? Do you have a kind of a filter in your mind that you use for certain agencies? I'm curious about that. That's what my question was about.
Yeah. First, I posted in the YouTube chat. I posted a link to the essay about the German minister about the COVID.
Oh, thanks for that.
Yeah. So it's a big question, I guess. Now, when I first went into YouTube, it wasn't called YouTube; it was called Google Video. So yeah, I'm an OG YouTuber. So many of my my YouTube videos were deleted because Google acquired YouTube, or how was that? It was first Google Video, and then they deleted some of those because they were changing the name to YouTube. I don't know. It's a kind of a moot point anyway. No, so basically, I do kind of a filtering of the news of the world by doing things that you are doing anyway, right? So because over the years you've gathered like 500 people that you follow on Twitter, and you've discerned between good friends and bad friends on Facebook and stuff, and then that kind of becomes your filter to the world, because what they talk about, you want to look into. I think that's the most simple way I can answer it. I also, of course, have a background in the, in computer science and search and retrieval, so it's like the case about this German minister. It's very easy for me to make a search for that on different search platforms and news platforms and figure out if that happened or was censored or whatever. But I only go to mainstream media for verification that something took place, right? So if I want to know if the Queen of England is buried yet, then I go to Wikipedia or mainstream media because they probably wouldn't lie about the Queen being buried. But for other stuff, I trust high moral individuals who do what they do outside of the mainstream and outside of the for-profit reporting, I guess.
Hey, RGC, welcome. Well, I love your question, Sophie, and I really appreciate too what you're saying going south. Understanding how to do research, how archivalism works. I'm sure that's not even the right phrase. It would be really interesting to try to put together a guide for people in like how to make sense of the world. Which I have never tried to do, but here's a few principles that kind of come to mind straight off the bat. For me, I think that the number one thing that's really important is to get a sense of your hubris, to try to understand the nature of news media is to instill hubris in you. When I see Rachel Maddow or whatever, they're and people who subscribe to the Times, not that I'm like lambasting them, but it's important to note that they market to you the idea that if you receive their content, then you know the truth, and it's really important to get a wall between you and that sense. It's so important to kind of have a healthy sense of doubt, in any information you might receive. It's really important to understand that first, the doubt is non-zero. There's some possibility it's not true, and always keeping that before you and reminding yourself of that fact. And then the nature of the information and the source it's coming from, all these things can help you understand what is the amount of doubt that one ought to kind of consider there. The next thing that I think is worth saying is, I am extremely suspicious of anything someone else is serving to me. If they're serving it to you, on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, you are the product. You are the product they're working to influence into a market to make money off of. When you watch the broadcast news, you are the product. That's really important. So, wealthy people, they buy their media. They buy it from Bloomberg. They buy it from reputable sources because that's the only way that they feel confident that they can get sound information. If you're not paying someone to deliver you the truth, then you can count on some element of untruth creeping in there. And that's just so important. Kind of along that lines is filter bubbles. If you go and kind of cultivate a set of sources that that feel comfortable or align with you, you risk falling into a filter bubble of, especially these days, of self-reinforcing untruth.
Yes,
So
but I'm sorry to interrupt. The counter example is really you guys. In the days of Lord Yu, when I was started hanging out in the chat on this show, all of you had a different view of the COVID pandemic than I had. I was the guy who went and got vaccinated, or so they said. I got the product into my arm twice, and so I kept listening to you, even though I thought you guys were crazy, for standing up to this to this narrative. And the same thing with people like Sam Mitchell and some journalists over in Bristol in the UK. who I've been interviewed by several times before on the radio station. So all of these other people around me were I kept them in my filter bubble, as you said, but I kept them even though they contradicted my own core beliefs. And so instead of deleting them from my filter or from my friends lists, I kept listening to them, and I kept living with the contradiction, of them having a different view. And so slowly, I looked into maybe these guys have a point. Maybe Lord Hugh isn't so crazy after all, right? So what's it called? The expression? I can't remember the scientific term for this contradiction. It's a
Yeah, but
two-part
being
word.
able to live
Yeah.
with doubt is really important. Yeah, so I appreciate. I think that's a really important point. So much of the media, especially that which tries to make us into a market, tries to make us feel comfortable. But living with doubt and uncertainty is not necessarily comfortable. And so, yeah, totally, you need dissenting views. That's really important
Cognitive
to it.
cognitive dissonance is the word I was looking for.
Hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, dissenting views. My other main counterexample to what you said is the you have social audio is a new concept. So on Twitter you have the Twitter Spaces. There basically thousands of people can join in an audio conversation with each other, almost like I guess like radio in the old times when you can go on the radio and have a discussion via your phone or something. So there is this guy who is running the biggest Twitter Spaces around. Every time he goes on and has a topic and a meeting, it's the biggest space all over Twitter globally. Like anything from 5,000 to 15,000 people listening at the time. And this guy called Mario Nafal, I think, he has the principle. He calls these things roundtable discussions, right? And he even makes a newsletter summarizing what was said or what topics were discussed and stuff. So he has the principle on his Twitter Space roundtables that both sides are to be represented in the speakers. That you have speakers from both sides, and it works really, really well. They discuss crazy topics like the COVID stuff and the Twitter files about Hunter Biden or whatever. And the last thing I heard on it was about the WEF, the World Economic Forum in Davos, and you have people who support them among the speakers, and people who are very, very skeptical and against them. And one person summarized why this works very well, because he has when the spaces don't crash, he has like 4 or 6 hour long conversations on these things, right? And that means that people who just want to sound off and disagree with the other people, they get to do that. But then you come into hour 4 or hour 5 or something, and you kind of forced to actually listen a bit to the opponents on the other side. Then you can't sort of help getting some kind of sympathy for those people as well. So before the 6 hour thing is over, people have actually learned why and how people see things differently on the other side. I just think it works very well socially, and it's also a very interesting way of learning about a complex topic. Exactly because you get both sides, and you get people who are really, really engaged and read up on these things. So.
And that kind of reminds me, of I think an important point, and it's just learning to recognize journalism. So journalism, is very challenged these days and is in just a heap of trouble. But it is a science. It's kind of a messy science, but just like the scientific method, there's a protocol, there's a structure, there's key
Yeah.
features that are recognizable. And so, a journalistic approach is one that you can recognize or see absent in whatever media you happen to be viewing. And journalism codifies including dissenting opinions. It specifically steers away from anecdotal evidence. There are features to journalism like well resourced assertions that are really important. And as you kind of look about the media landscape, you start to kind of recognize where that's absent or where it's present, and it gives you a better sense of who to trust. Like Democracy Now, I think is probably about the only, soup to nuts kind of media program that I feel very confident trusting without other opinions, even though it is from a leftist perspective, but you can recognize journalistic elements in their approach, even the way that they display the news. But the other things, just real quick to say about the nature of media, you know, media today is all it's all for profit, and so understand that you're the product. And I think that textbooks like manufacturing consent, a book like Catch 22 is a kind of important underpinning, or work like Naomi Klein's stuff about shock doctrine and the nature of the media. All these things are really important. But if you understand Chomsky's model of manufacturing consent and how big that can be, I think that this is just a really important guide to interpreting the media. There's a ton more that could be said, though, I think.
Hmm. Hmm. So, Sophie, are we going to go more into the pandemic thing or fascism, or do you have other
Well,
suggestions?
you posted those comments, and you had probably some ideas
Yeah,
when you posted that. So if you want to continue on that subject, I would like it as we go through your points, we can discuss. But it would be nice to leave a bit of time to talk about what
of
I
course,
was suggesting too. But we can do that much later. There's no rush for that anyway. We've got plenty of other meetings where we can,
of
ponder.
course. You were talking about the anniversary, or
Yeah, yeah,
what do
but
you? Yeah, yeah.
it's in bit more than 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So, but
Clearly, yeah. We take that in hour two, I
yeah,
guess.
yeah. Continue on your
Yeah,
agenda.
it's only one, basically only one point left, and that's the nature of fascism. I can read the point. What is the nature of fascism? Is it groups? Is it a group of friends drinking beer by a large flag, or is it systemic structural totalitarianism with carpet censorship, etc.? So of course that's formulated by me, and I have my view on it. I have I have some friends who like to have a big ass Norwegian flag on the wall and sit around and be, I guess, what you would call white supremacists over in America. But and also growing up, we had these stories about these neo-Nazi skinheads, running amok on the graveyard and doing all kinds of, what I'm talking about. So is this fascism thing that we all have to fear? Is it about some crazed individuals kind of thing? Maybe some friends or groups of them, or is it really about something that Russia is doing, or something that Brazil or America is doing? With the deep state being a part of it, and with the FBI being weaponized by the ruling party to attack the other party, while also both mainstream media and social media are censored so that you only get one narrative on things. So that's kind of a quick introduction. I think it's very interesting if we are going to see these big pieces, how they fit together in a geopolitics puzzle with the rest of the things we know. So I would just like to suggest one possible piece or scenario, and that is related to the storming of the parliament in Brazil. So I'm seeing that you have and everybody says this, even the mainstream media says that there is a clear pattern likeness between what happened in Brazil and what happened with the January 6th thing in the USA. And it does seem like there is some kind of big um, big movement towards a more totalitarian thing on the left side of politics. You know, everybody who's read George Orwell's 1984 remembers that the kind of the Nazi party in that book is INGSOC, English Socialism. That's part of why it doesn't surprise me that you can have totalitarian fascist regimes on the left side of politics. Doesn't really matter if it's left or right. The thing is that they hate free speech and they hate the freedom of ordinary people, and they want to basically do what they please, like Stalin murdering millions of people, Stalin killing all the anarchists and killing all the intellectuals. You have, you know, even down there in Southeast Asia, you had some crazed totalitarian dictator who killed everybody with glasses because, you know, if you have glasses, you're probably an intellectual, and thus probably you are trouble, right? So what I'm seeing is that you have a pattern where you have election in a country, and there's always been, you know, kind of attempts from both sides really in elections in kind of two-party systems to cheat those elections. And there is at least anecdotal evidence that both in Brazil and the USA, there were such attempts at cheating in the election. And then there are some laws and regulations in those countries to allow for the skeptical party to raise those questions and sue or start a process for controlling what went down and possibly overturning the election or have a second election or something, right? And so in both of those nations, Brazil and the US, there was at the same time a very heavy-handed censorship campaign on social media. Some of you remember that President Trump was thrown off Twitter, basically during that campaign of questioning the election in 2020, and also it became a reason good enough for closing your Twitter account or Facebook account even, that you just doubted the correctness of the election. So a parallel there in Brazil, and I hate going back and fact checking my own writings or articles, but I did this week, and I listened a lot to Glenn Greenwald, who's a very thorough, interesting reporter on these kinds of things, and he also has a husband from Brazil, so he has lots of connections to Brazil that makes it relevant to him to figure out what's going on. Yeah, so basically, this Supreme Court judge in Brazil did exactly what I said in my very, very fast article about we need to talk about Brazil, because he doubled down and introduced very, very hard censorship laws for social media this week, and it's going exactly like I what do you call it? Like I suggested in that article on Reddit, and this is the the red or the left side of totalitarianism, and the connection to COVID or the pandemic. I think maybe I would just suggest that it might be a disguise, right? So, like just like when you watch a magician, you're doing this thing with your right hand, and at the same time you're doing something else out of you with your left hand. So, if the whole pandemic thing and vaccine thing was supposed to be something more than just making money for the companies, it might be like a disguise, like get everybody to talk about and relate to this. And in the meantime, you crash both in America and Brazil into some kind of red political totalitarianism where you don't have the right to speak. So I'm not saying that's the truth. I'm just saying that's an interesting thing to consider and look at. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, right. I personally don't get lost into politics anymore. I suppose I just know that it's all rigged and it's all the same. Like DB said in the comments, left or right, we're in a concentration camp. We're in a prison, so we can be commenting about the wardrons and the visitors we get and the whole parcels we receive, but we're still in the same situation from my point of view. So yeah, it's interesting, but I still and I thank you for explaining how you look at the news and Yukon Fed to reminding us about hubris, which is fundamental in our type of group anyway, because we wouldn't be here if we didn't have it, and mistrust and a spirit of rebellion and resistance to anything that is served to us. Definitely. Have you got anybody else wants to say something about what Going South was interested in there, like fascism and its relationship with what is written actually in the comments, mostly. Um, well, it was really the pandemic really that started all this, wasn't it?
Yeah. I also looked into the VEF, the Davos meeting, and the interesting takeaway here, from my perspective, is that Europe and the VEF and the EU and stuff, those are the normal guys, believe it or not. What they are doing is kind of business as usual. You know, that they don't want to go crazy and stop industry or stop fossil fuels. They just want to. They're basically doing the common sense business as usual thing. So they're planning on kind of going into the future, going into the 2060s or whatever, and doing this kind of green quote unquote capitalism. So in all of this big global picture of madness, Europe and Davos and the VEF is kind of the normal guys who are just doing what we always did. And I think there is zero possibility that they were behind any part of the pandemic. I think that they're just being the old common sense European civilized kind of people. I'm not supporting them. I'm just saying that in this big picture, it seems that these guys are the boring normal ones.
And so much of this, I think, it depends on perspective from where you sit. The Davos folks, of course, would love to continue keeping this thing going because it's rewarded them so handsomely. That's really important, you know. I think, though, given the nature of elections and the censorship, I think is really interesting too. I just, from my perspective, there's just a much bigger game going on. There's a much greater context to take into account. I think when you look at the information system that is in place in industrialized nations across the world today, I think that censorship is certainly a thing, right? And there's plenty of discussion over the merits of particular types of censorship, given that this civilization has given up on trying to make whole, balanced, appropriate, and brilliant people. That was never part of the point. Part of the point was always, all along, is to create serfs, to elevate those in power. And you can't do that through sheer force. You do it through manipulating information. So hard baked into feudalism sense is the manipulation of perspective and worldview and information, So one thing I think that was discovered along the way, similar to 1984, is that outright censorship does not work outright. Like you may be able to kind of trim margins of information that you want to suppress. And I think that's what's going on here. And we could argue about the motivation behind that suppression, from different elements. If it's anti-capitalist sentiment in American for-profit media, or if it's, people sharing concerns about the vaccine during the context of the COVID pandemic, which, for whatever reasons will kill lots of people. I mean, there's plenty of debatable aspects to the nature of censorship in these small ways, or the nature of censorship on privately owned, internet tech media, which is problematic inherently. Just its function is problematic, not the way it kind of trims the communities that it wants to be rid of for whatever reason. I think the key thing is that folks long ago realized that kind of, outright totalitarian censorship always creates blowback, and so can never be fully successful. And when I look at the elite, of which I feel like maybe I've, perhaps just met one or two, but they are very sophisticated individuals. And I think that they realize that, this kind of totalitarian censorship creates blowback, and that can be counterproductive to their aims. And so they have a much more nuanced and tactile approach to the information ecosystem. And one of the most important things is it's all about creating noise. If the din is so loud and so busy, you can't tell signal from noise. You can't tell truth from fiction. You can't tell who to listen to. And, they just kind of elevate people who are self-interested into positions of power, like Glenn Greenwald, in my opinion. I think he's a complex figure at best. Then, the truth itself becomes undermined because you can't, there's too much keeping up with the Kardashians on the airwaves to even tell what's fact or fiction. And that is the most effective censorship discovered since the 1980s. It's not that you stamp out lies, it's that you drown them in garbage. There's the whole information paradigm here is very big and very complex, but the people who do control it look for emergent dynamics, and they fuel those dynamics to kind of create a context that allows them to propagate the messages that are helpful for them. A lot of the time just by ignoring the things that matter the most. Like, as the COVID pandemic rages, the corporations that are making out like bandits, direct from taxpayers, or, just the examples could go on and on. I just think that the story is very, very large here. So I'll just say that.
But from the perspective of an Extinctionati, because we're in this meeting, and that's why we've been here for 2 or 3 years, what is the I think I would be very careful and warn people about this noise, because I think that this is a lot of this for us is an obstacle on the path that we are on the path of surviving, on the path of developing our spirituality, on the path of all sorts of other things. But I think that we have to be very careful of this noise. You used the word noise. Was it corn-fed or was it going south? You used I think it's you, corn-fed, used the word noise, and it's a form of pollution, and you know well that as you said, it's it's addictive to this. If we look back in history and we look back in the recent history of this information flow is only. It was a story of messengers. It was a story of firsthand. It was a story of. It was already a story of propaganda too. I'm not denying that, especially when it comes to churches and religions. But yeah, I would be very. I kind of got this sort of repulsion for daily news and immediate feeling that I need to go and wash my ears when I've heard too much of that stuff, and that I kind of am only interested in what they're not talking about, basically.
I would just like to remind everybody who is talking about that we shouldn't discuss politics, that Lord Yu used an entire 2-3 hour long show dedicated to the January 6th storming of the Congress in America. So clearly, this is bigger than just should I vote for this or this politician.
Yes,
When
I
you have
remember.
that kind, when you
Yeah,
have that
I
kind
remember.
of potentially false flag agent provocateur stormings of the main public buildings in a big nation, in a superpower, that is a bigger thing than just should we vote left or right, right?
Yeah, I remember these couple of meetings in January after that event, because they were happening. I remember that Hugh was very emotional about it, because he was seeing a potential martial law coming. He was seeing a potential precipitation of collapse in that event. He was. He was looking at all what could happen with the military. It was quite interesting. But of course, I'm not saying that we don't have to comment um, on catastrophes or events or wars that are happening in the world. But what I'm saying is that me personally, I'm very careful of not getting the noise um, in too much, and I like to take everything. As I told you, I like to imagine what is really happening, and what is really happening is not in the news. They won't talk
Yeah,
about it.
and if I could build on that, I mean, I totally agree, and I must be masochistic or something because I follow politics like I'm addicted to it. It's incredible, and it's good and bad. I follow the media like crazy. I watch constantly all kinds of stuff from many different perspectives. But here's the thing: I think it's my sense that Hugh's core message, and it's become my view. Politics is inherently designed to confuse and divide us. And that doesn't mean that important things don't happen. Important things do happen. But it's just really important to understand, in my view, that the nature of politics inherently is to divide and confuse us. That's the whole point, And there are many great things to talk about within that. But then, extending that to the news media, the dominant news media, the mainstream kind of for-profit news media that has become dominant, is inherently designed to divide and confuse us. Now, that being said, it's a massive feature in real life. It's something that we, are forced to interact with, and is even, oppresses us. But and so I love those conversations about these things. But it's really important to keep that fact before us that it is designed to screw with our heads, and unpacking that is really challenging. So when I think about some of these events, and the goals of the Extinctionati, I mean, I really hold dear the kind of um, you know revealing ourselves to ourselves and understanding where we're at in the real world, trying to understand the BS that's being propagated out there. But personally, years ago, I gave up the illusion of any kind of media approach or any kind of growing this group to be important in some way, or like maintaining conversations separate that would be helpful toward our situation, because we're knee deep in collapse already, and this thing has a head of steam. Plus, beyond that, in my work in the news media, it's really important to understand that the people who define and create conception for the public are the people who have the bullhorns. They're the people who have the media propagation instruments. The people who have the media propagation instruments are the corporations that own them. I realized, talking to my grandma, who didn't believe in global warming, that as soon as I left her presence, she was going to sit down and watch 4 hours of Fox News. My grandma spent more time with Fox News, by a factor of 3 or 4 than she ever did with me in my entire life. We will talk to each other. Maybe this will reach 10 people. And at the same time, all of the major news stations are talking to hundreds of thousands of people during that same time. There's a whole industry here that manufactures conceptualizations. And, I love our company here, but I have no illusions that this is going to catch on and grow, because there's an active industry to manufacture its opposition to truth, opposition to empowerment. And part of that's the interplay of politics. It's just, this is how the thing is designed to work, and it's quite astounding. It's really amazing, actually. It's quite a machine they put together.
Politics comes from the Greek polis, that means city, and it cannot but be dysfunctional anyway, because it's coming from a structure that has proven to bring on the collapse of civilization. It's very sad what you're saying about people riveted to their channels of news. I've seen that around, and your story is not. It actually brings back to me a movie that was done, or in the years in around 2002 or 3 or 4, I can't remember, called Requiem for a Dream. It was a movie that was made on all sorts of addictions that were plaguing America, and one of them was the screen, the TV, and it was showing how it had completely destroyed families. I don't know if anybody remembers that movie, but it was so hard, so true. um yeah, anyway, but
Yeah, I
it's
remember that.
yeah, and it's,
And
you see, this kind of face you see on people looking at the screen, that sort of, if you look at them, you can see that what it's doing. I've often sat and looked at people while they look at their face, while they're riveted to their whatever soap or news or anything that's and I'm not saying, I'm not putting myself and saying, oh, look at me, and I've been there, I know what it's like. Well, I haven't been there because I never really had time to do that, because I was working, or I was a mother, and I'm the outdoors. So, but I've known in terms of weaknesses when I've been stuck to a binge watching series or something. I know the debilitating effect it has on my brain. But for people who are doing it every day and who find solace and consolation in that little man of the news that's there, that's sort of humming every day, a sort of mantra that's keeping them, you know, alive. And yeah, oh, it's just pathetic. And think that goes on multiplied by millions and millions and millions.
yeah, it's amazing to just see people transported away from their awareness, to have their kind of consciousness stolen and taken. See their bodies sitting, but their mind's blank. It's really, like you said, it's really incredible. I remember that movie too that you mentioned. But earlier I mentioned some reading that I think is really helpful, like Manufacturing Consent, but I've really been into Guy Debord and Society of the Spectacle lately, in trying to understand how Polis, the city, a center of consumption, extracting from the landscape around it, creates an information dynamic to justify itself. It's like you said, it's really fascinating. But I think Society of the Spectacle really nails what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, I'm sorry.
And still, I have this rubbernecking fixation with watching lots and lots of media anyway, But yeah, getting inoculated against it's really key.
Oh, the nuclear war is going to be really good to watch on the telly. I'm looking forward to that. I used to watch Shock and Awe over Baghdad back in the day, and I reckon that I will have at least, me, maybe Inish Manin as well, will be able to watch about 10 minutes of the nuclear war on the telly before it comes straight at us. So I'm hoping there'll be a live stream, because it's going to be addictive. It'll be the last thing we get to watch.
Sorry, I can just but laugh at what you said because there's no other answer. It's just, it's yeah. Yeah.
I still feel guilty about the sort of morbid relish with which I watched the Iraq War unfold. That was what kicked me off. That was the sort of heroine of, death and destruction, and
Yeah, I
that
remember when it
feel of
started.
outrage, But I was compelled to watch it over and over again.
I remember when they started to do those live wars on TVs, and and how they started to do also what you call what's the name in journalism, that news are going on all the time, continuous. There's a name for that. I can't remember what it is, but those channels have got the news going all day continuously. That started to appear about 10 years ago, didn't it? But it was preceded by live covering of wars, and the terrible onslaught of propaganda that happened after 9/11, where people also started to have their TV probably in their bed at that stage. Um, yeah, what can you do? What can you do? I was so taken aback when I first started to travel in extremely poor countries of the south, of Africa and Asia, and to see the forest of satellite dishes on roofs of people who didn't even have, enough to clothe and feed themselves. Uh, so you're up against a manufactured uh, mass hypnosis. Um, so yeah, that's why the conversation started on the news and started on different things. But my question to both going south and corners, how do you sift through the news? And to come back to that, is that because I have no method. Confed was saying that you could design a method to do that. I kind of go by. I look at Reddit, but not the other subs. Our sub first. So I think that's a filter, because some people in the group will see something that will stand out and they will comment on it or they will post it, and then I have got my local radio, and the local radio here is the local news, but they give a few little things on the world, and then if I hear something that pricks my ear, I will just go and have a and search for it a little bit and research, and then I kind of go with the, how do you say that, a bit of chance and a bit of, I don't know. I think I go by chance. I don't follow anything logical in terms of news. But I do remember a time when it was the routine, and I can understand. But some people, it sort of gets. That's what the divine beast is saying. It's out of boredom sometimes. It's out of boredom.
Well, it's the spectacle. I mean, that's, it needs to attract our attention. And, there's a great film short I saw one time of an almost uncontacted tribe in Africa. And the first way that it kind of broke up their family and lured them into the city was through the radio with jazz music, The system infects cultures as its first toehold into then stealing resources and stealing our time and stealing our lives. And I think that's really important. I think, something reminded me also of, if folks know Chris Hedges, another piece of reading that I thought was just so good. It's really subtle, but one of his most famous books is War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning. And I think about, when I saw Shock and Awe and the first Iraq War with all the, videos of computer-guided bombs looking all amazing or whatever, it just, it reinforced to me that by focusing our attention and giving people a common struggle, it misdirects them against the real enemies, toward enemies that, are people we've never met, So I think War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning is other great reading here. But yeah, when I think about the news media and how to discern it, I think learning what journalism is and isn't is really important. Like Going South was saying, learning how to research a particular topic thoroughly and from all sides is really important. And just keeping up a healthy immune system against misinformation, disinformation, really looking at why any news outlet is giving you news at all, let alone particular bits of news. Understanding what their motive is, is so important. But that's just to
Yeah,
tack on
like this German health minister who is saying that COVID will give you permanent immune deficiency. He's saying that from a position in the government, and should we really trust anybody in government at this stage? And he's also saying it through corporate media platforms, and that's a key example where you have to take everything you know about corporate media, everything you know about the leaders of nations and politicians, and you have to assess whether this story something you want to believe, and if it goes against everything you previously heard about the pandemic and everything you know about the corrupt people who run nations these days, then maybe this is just another story that is supposed to scare us into lockdowns and scare us into masking on the bus again.
I mean, obviously, you can't believe anything at all.
Nope.
Except, so there's just no point in even trying. I mean, there's always the possibility that if something's appeared coming out of the mouth of some fucking politician or media outlet, it's always possible that something they say is true. So, even by accident. And so if you decide to believe the opposite of anything you come across, you're none the wiser. If you try to apply various analytical methodologies, filters and whatnot, you're still none the wiser. I think that the idea of finding out what's going on, which again, I'm as guilty as the next person of trying to find out what's going on. I share my comrades' addiction to news and various whatever non-conventional media. But there's, I mean, I've brought this up myself a million times. I have no academic background. I'm not a particularly analytical thinker. But when I listen to people who've tried to reason their way through figuring out what the fuck's going on, you can find a PhD to oppose any point of view, as far as I can see, because you can read this, that, and the other, and you can find the opposite argued just as convincingly. So yeah, I think it would be quite good I'm not advocating this as such because I know I'm probably not going to do it, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to really just to figure out some like mindset to disengage from thinking, is there anything fucking going on here or not? And just to view everything as a sort of fictional movie that may or may not be entertaining at various times.
I think a key case that illustrates what you're saying, Bob, or what you call it, tidy Bob, this time, is you know how the right side of politics, they tend to say that, oh yeah, the media, the mainstream media is talking about climate change, so that must be automatically false. And then what they are forgetting is that the real lesson from corporate media is really rather that they are consequently not to be trusted. They're persistently unreliable, right? So instead of the things that they say about climate automatically being wrong or a hoax, people even on the right should remember that these media and politicians are unreliable as sort of their main characteristic. And that means that even when they do talk about the climate change or a crisis or whatever, they're doing that in an unreliable way. So just to make a simple statement, they're doing it as if we have still have 50 or 100 years to sort of address the problem, right? And from my personal perspective, the climate isn't even the problem; it's the solution. And instead, the industrial world is the problem, and the climate is very fast solving that problem. Yeah. So how do we communicate that with the right side of politics? That is the real take.
Especially if we're not the lead communicators. I mean, if we're not putting out the dominant volume of communications, then, you know, it's already lost, right?
But why do it anyway? What's the fucking point?
Yeah. It's
like
like
you're
trying
say
to
anything to anyone. Like people are so far away from any perception. Like you're saying, GS, the fucking, even the people who accept the climate problem in denial, because they're all talking about fucking windmills or whatever. And then you go, oh yeah, it's not, the climate isn't even the problem, quoth our mate Nate, it's overshoot is the problem, or industry is the problem, or civilization is the problem. So even the people who know there's a problem don't know what the problem is. And so everyone's in denial. Sorry, Cornfed, over to you.
Oh no, yeah. I mean, I agree, but it's just so important to be okay with complexity. Because anytime you have a principle, you're going to find scenarios that break your principle. Any generalization is categorically untrue in specific cases, including this generalization. You know what I mean? It's like the key thing about information that's served to us through the media is that it's served to us because somebody has an interest in it. That interest could be about the particular piece of information that's served to us. So it's served to us in a way or for a purpose that advantages somebody. But even more often, it's simply a distraction from the omission, which is the important part that we ought to try to recognize or understand, is the things that are being left out of the news altogether or about a particular issue that's being served to us. Because the way this whole thing works, I mean, a politician may be accidentally right, just like even a broken clock is right twice a day. The key thing is the whole thing works because it's mostly true. It's the little bits that are untrue or the parts that are left out where the real trick is. That's where the devil lies in the details. So, it's interesting to think, like, what is the point of even following the media? Well, I think that it is possible sometimes, while keeping a degree of doubt, that you can suss out reality in some cases from unreality out of the media. And I think that might be useful sometimes. But I think a lot of people, would, maybe DB, I'm thinking of actually, would remind us that, the truth that's important is right in front of us, and these clever spectacles are emotional plays at distracting us from what really matters, which is each other and the land we live upon. You know.
Absolutely. But
The truth.
you know what came to my mind then? I think I told that, I don't know if I talked about it in a meeting or if I talked about it in a call with you, Bob, or something. I can't remember. But I'm from the generation that saw the television appear when I was about 10 or something like that. Can't remember. But when the news, I mean, before that there was the radio, and I remember my mom in the kitchen listening to the BBC, my father in his room listening to the French news. But we were kids, we didn't really. But there was already a status, like you used to have to shut up when the news was on, that it's something important, as if, and you know, as a kid you just, you know, your parents are God, so you just think, okay. But you can't either completely dismiss this early um how do you call that, conditioning of children seeing adults attaching more importance to a man talking on the radio, on the television, than playing with the children, or being, you know, being there, being present, and his stare after that being diverted to the television, and the mother and the father or whoever's family you're with. And I think that we can't neglect that on whole generations that have followed me, because they have been in front of that sort of pseudo-religious altar in houses where the television, for many, many years now, television has become a wall nearly in the house. But, you know, it was like some of those oriental altars where you had the TV in the most important part of the room, with sometimes nice objects around it and little things, and well polished, and all the chairs arranged around it. So there was kind of like a temple type of thing. So all children of the Western world, and of course of other world now, but of my generation and the generation after, have been completely conditioned in that sort of religious way to the news and to the box, and that has there is no, you can't compare that with anything else in our past history. And why we are so, yeah, religious, why we are so, all of us are to a certain extent addicted to news, to media. It's not necessarily coming from an intellectual curiosity or a need to understand the world better. I think it's the deep root of it is in an addiction and a conditioning. I
Yeah,
don't know.
you've made that point repeatedly. I think a key counterpoint to that narrative, I think, is that we are, from the mainstream side of society, we are supposed to be grown-up citizens, well, let's call it political animals. We are supposed to have an opinion about should the government do this or that to the price of electricity, blah blah blah. And so where maybe your parents were coming from is that they wanted to be active citizens in a democratic France or whatever. And
They
then you have
were.
to
They
then
were
you have to keep yourself
very
informed.
politically involved. Yeah, they were completely. Oh my God, very much. So, you know, it was very important. I'm talking from my experience for them, what was happening and
And you
politics.
and your father had to read the Libération
Yeah.
or whatever, right?
Oh yeah,
Le Monde, Le
he was
Monde.
coming from the generation who listened to Radio London during the German occupation, and then he was himself involved in politics very much. So yeah, but I'm not the only one. I just don't want to expand from my own experience and think that everybody's the same. But what I'm saying is that there is this religious dimension that we can't deny nowadays, and that you can observe in
I,
all sorts of homes. You know.
I think another big difference is that even though we know today that most newspapers and TV stations are wrong and lying all the time, there used to be another era where the BBC, the NRK, etc., would actually have a much higher trust in the population, and for a good reason, because I believe anyway, they were doing better journalism. Maybe you see Cornfed, you seem to know the media. Can you support my assertion that the media and the journalists were doing a better job 50 years ago than today?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's certainly my sense. But I think the truth is still complicated. But yeah, I agree. I mean, the idea of journalism is, it's comparable to the scientific method. It's a way of kind of getting at the truth, although it's not as firm, right? And it can be messy, it can be manipulated, it can be misleading, but authentic journalism is something that people would aspire to as a service to humanity, to help each other. And that's really important. However, I think that journalism can be extremely challenged if you look at outlets like the Washington Post or the New York Times, which I think are very credible sources. They are very factually accurate. The worldview that they create is wholly unhelpful. The work that they do um, has omissions and perspectives which lead to something that is not very anarchistic or equitable or good for people, in my view. And so, when you think about something like the BBC back in the day, I think that it was far more journalistic. And it served the citizens with facts in a better way. And this may have been a time, notably when the status quo was concerned about things like socialist revolution or communism. And so immediately it takes on the perspective inherently that those are probably bad things. You know what I mean? And so you see bias introduced into the nature of the platform and its enterprise already. But if you kind of step back and look at the BBC, I think that the concept of the fasces is so important here. Like, the fasces are rods bound together with a leather strap. This again goes back to the idea of the Chris Hedges book. War is a force that gives us, England, a nation, a people, meaning. It's a force that gives us meaning. So even when the BBC was fact-based, and even if it was standing upon a position, an outlook upon the world, which is maybe complicated, as England extended its empire all over the world, not treating people very well. Maybe it stood up for Britons, though. It's important to note that the function of an entity like the BBC or the New York Times was to bind that people together into a force, to give them a shared perspective. And it's notable that through the creation of that shared perspective, through the creation of that people, some stand higher and some stand lower. Some are at the top with all the money and some are working in the factories. And so, yes, but yeah, it's all very complicated. And I think, yeah, so I'll
You're
just
not
stop there.
glamorizing somewhat the efforts of the upper classes, or whatever you want to call them. I mean, the BBC was always a pile of shite. It was always just propaganda. And I sort of see what you're saying about, cementing the social fabric or whatever, the Two Ronnies sketch. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure about this idea that, oh yeah, it was better in the olden days. I mean, I've been saying that the BBC is a bunch of shit, and I don't think that not that I'm really authorized to say anything, but I've been saying to people, look, you can't believe anything these people say, and it was like, oh, get your tinfoil hat, mate, and now it's become more of a sort of accepted idea. At least since the Corbyn business, like, more people seem aware, I guess, of how corrupt it is, and maybe
Yeah, just to
more
respond quickly.
factuality. Yeah, I just want to say that the factual nature of things is neither here nor there in the face of propaganda. So you can say facts.
Yeah, no, your point is well taken. And let me just say this: it's all a matter of perspective. From one perspective, what I just said, is to hold up the BBC as the, oracle of truth. From another perspective, the people who are left out, the people who aren't included in that truth, it's a pile of shit. And all that's true all at the same time,
Yeah, but
depending on where you sit in
other
your
fault
interests.
is, you
But
know,
the factiness of the media writ large is kind of more what I was addressing. Going South's question was, I believe that the ability to relay fact used to be stronger through the information ecosystem than it is today. Now, the bias
what
inherent
is
in
a
that fact,
fact?
the omission, the way that is used as a weapon has always been true. Absolutely, I agree with you.
So what difference does it make if it's a fact? If in other words,
It depends on where you sit. It depends on if you're the Iraqi or the American.
yeah, but okay, but there's a sort of level of fact where a bomb just fell on my head and blew up me and my family, which is
Yep.
a very strong fact. And then there's the other fact of Mr. X or Mr. Y got caught laundering money or whatever it is, or won an election or lost an election or got food poisoning.
Mhm.
And so the sort of bomb on your head fact that is relevant to the individual who experienced it, but outside of that, whether something is factual or not it doesn't matter. Like, I remember there used to be, or there might still exist, these little tabloid sort of newspapers which would have these like stories that were so insane, like, oh, I was kidnapped by an alien and we got married on their planet and had a honeymoon, and then they brought me back to Earth and I had a baby, blah blah blah, and then I married somebody and pretended the baby belonged to that person. These really like nutty stories, and that would be in a sort of like it was like a comic, but it was a newspaper, right? I can't remember what they were called, these things, but they were completely wacky. And really, it dawned on me that, yeah, but like, I mean, I don't mean like tabloids like we have in this country, the Sun or whatever, where it's tittle tattle about sports people and so on. But I mean literally these kind of wacky sort of completely fantasy stories, but still presented as if it was news.
Depends on who you trust.
Well, yeah, but it's no different anyway. Is the point? It's immaterial. In other words, what I'm asking, I guess, is even if you could identify a fact, what use is that anyway? Because at the end of the day, the only important thing is the impression that's being made on people through the transmission of information. So if you transmit information, whether that information relates to some material reality or not, the only purpose for anybody to transmit information is to try and essentially manipulate or influence the thoughts of the receiver of the transmission. Is that fair
Indeed.
to say?
Yeah, DB, I think, pointed this out in the comments just above. It's this is the process of shaping people's perception of the world is inherently bad.
Yeah, and I can use a fact to do that, or I can make some shit up, right?
And these guys do all of it and then some.
And do they? Yeah, but they probably don't even know what are facts and what aren't facts as well. So, like, I mean, I always, I used to think anyway, there was the man behind the curtain who knew what was going on. But, who bloody knows?
Well,
I think we all can only trust what we see with our eyes, and everything else comes through a filter. And I think keeping that in front of our minds is really important. However, I do think some people know more than others.
Well, if you go back to the etymology of journalism, it's journal. It's somebody who would look at the day and what happened on the day. For my concept of journalism when I was young, I looked at also the side of reporters that were big contributors to the at the beginning of journalism of information, people who traveled and who went to report about what they said. And around the 60s and 70s, you still had that sort of journalism reporters going around, as you said, going south. Maybe 50 years ago, it started to go a bit strange because of the big corporation, because of profit, because of greed, because of propaganda. And things started to evolve into big machines like we have now. But yeah, the origin of the words are to report on what's happening around you every day, and no comments. The problem is now that if you if you if you're able to suffer a news bulletin of some big channel of any kind, BBC or other, you will hardly hear people just reporting. You will hear a narrative that has been pre-digested and distributed to all the other medias. So you can nearly copy and paste everything that's said on one into the other, and you will not see anymore the reporters. You will see some of their photographs, some of their films, sometimes on YouTube or on different independent sometimes things. But you won't have these long stories of people who have lived in a place for long enough to make a report. That's so. I don't really think that journalism still exists. To come back to what we were talking about at the start, I don't think it's there anymore. We're talking about something in the past that's gone, dead, forgotten. No comments.
Well, I kind of think it's taken some new platforms, and it's been following the new technological developments. For instance, the Mario guy I mentioned earlier, he actually went down to Davos in Switzerland to make some of his Twitter Spaces conversations from that town, and trying to get guests from up high and stuff. And I think what he's doing is really, really close to the best of journalism that we used to see back in the day. Perhaps, with the always always allowing at least two sides in the discussions. And if there is a blizzard where you live and you got nothing to do on a Sunday, listening to him reporting and having a conversation live from Davos, it's really, really informing. And it's kind of, I have kind of a sort of sad memory of reading really great Scandinavian newspapers back in the day. It's like today I can't even open them or see them in the shop because they are so crappy. But that longing to have this really good 2-3 page article about something important, it's just a faint memory.
Yeah, I remember that. We had a paper like that in France called Le Monde Diplomatique, which was not a daily paper. I think it was bi-weekly, every 2 weeks, I think, I'm not sure. And it had some fantastic writers in it, and long analyses, long essays.
I worked for them.
Yeah?
For Le Monde Diplomatique in Norway,
Yeah.
so they were.
All right.
They
Yeah,
were
they had international
they
correspondence.
were a monthly publication.
Monthly, was it? Yeah. But that was a little treasure, and there was a few of them there. But all that this, I don't know. I haven't bought a newspaper now in about 30 or 40 years, so I'm just it's gone.
Independent papers in the U.S. have just been obliterated. It's amazing. And sorry for the slow response. I was just trying to make some more coffee. But I think that it's so important to avoid black and white thinking. And this is just the nature of language. It's very hard to avoid, either or fallacies when speaking at all. But you said, of course, journalism doesn't exist like it used to, and it doesn't by and large, except where it does. And perhaps it never actually did back then, except maybe it was more common depending on who you were looking at and where you are and all that, or maybe it wasn't. But it's complicated. You recognize it where you do, and like the radio program that Going South is talking about, or maybe like Democracy Now. I think they're kind of biased, but it's not bad. But in general, it's terrible. Yeah.
Democracy Now is the worst. That's the thing. Democracy Now is worse than anything else because they're so duplicitous.
Yeah,
they're so pro-empire.
They are working in a milieu that
Navarro that does the same thing. That they're pretending to be on the edge of things, but they're worse.
Well, if you think about a book like A People's History of the United States as a counter to the dominant narrative, this whole thing operates as a system, right? And all the people in it are conscious of that. So it's complicated. I'll just say that, it's never either or.
It's another curiosity. It's like how much agency people have. I don't know. Would I be digressing if I just looked at GS's various links, and there's this Jessica Wildfire thing where there's a German bloke has said something about the COVID is causing the collapse of the immune system or damage to the immune system, but the vaccine skeptic, they're saying the vaccine is causing the problem in the immune system. So I don't know if that's just to bring on this whole head fucky thing of, so now the scared of COVID people are saying that COVID's causing the problems with the immune system. The scared of vaccine people are saying all along that the vaccine is causing the problems with the immune system. And I'm assuming that the scared of vaccine people will now say that the scared of COVID people are saying it's the COVID causing the problem. So COVID is causing the heart attacks and the collapsing immune systems, or otherwise it's the people who haven't taken their vaccines who are responsible for allowing COVID to spread. You just can't get anywhere with any of this, can you? I don't know if that's the point, GS, you're trying to make with that information, or are we supposed to take that as credible information? I don't know. But yeah, this is it. So yeah, I'd like to see some sort of argument. Like, I mean, Cornfed talked about like manufacturing consent, which I read a million years ago, and that really struck me as because Chomsky at that time with what's his name, Herman or whatever, they dissected very in a lot of convincing detail how the whole structure of the media and political spokespeople were creating reality. And according to that book, there's no reason to think that back in the day the media was in any general sense any better than it is today, except I think the difference these days is really more that the masks are off. So like the BBC can't be bothered to even pretend that they're a credible purveyor of information, because they don't need to bother anymore, because the population is that much more sort of fucking brainwashed and clueless. So because we're all like more stupid than we were because of COVID / all the vaccines that made us stupid maybe, but because we are all more brain damaged by media and brain damaged by the constant efforts of civilization to perplex and bamboozle us, then maybe the BBC back in the day had to put on a bit more of a show of being pretend impartial, put on a bit more of a show of being facty, and put on a bit more of a show of correcting their errors that were erroneously made if they ever got spotted, and so on and so forth. It's just like nowadays, fuck it, why bother? Why go to the trouble of pretending that all news media isn't basically the same as Fox News or whatever, these bells and whistles, flashing lights, outrageous statements and all of this, that the whole circus is basically a less underground. Does that, and so maybe that's the only tangible difference. And I remember like reading that, in terms of, ironically, okay, I'll talk about people who do seem credible. So you've got not only Chris Hedges has some credibility, John Pilger is another person that springs to mind. There's various people in the world of journalism that seem to be trying to tell the truth. But then, I mean, look at fucking Chomsky. I mean, Chomsky was a very, very interesting person, and he's always been a bit iffy in my mind because he's too forgiving of the state to which I formerly belonged. But in the run up to the recent election in the United States, Chomsky had this whole hysterical thing about if you don't vote for Sleepy Joe, then your children will drown, and blah blah blah, and made this whole like hysterical thing. And then he went, oh, people who haven't had vaccines against the lurgy must all be locked in camps and all this hysterical shit. And you sort of go, oh yeah, but this is a 90-year-old man. He's not, he's become frail, or he's not quite what he used to be. But you think, no, load of shit, so it's all shit. Yeah, I mean, basically it all comes down to, we know what's in front of our nose, and maybe any focus on anything outside of that is only for entertainment purposes. And I try and relate to that. I have an addiction to news media. I have an addiction to world affairs and politics and so on. I am morbidly fascinated with it, and I will get drawn into a conversation about it at the drop of a hat. But in the same way that people smoke cigarettes, it's not good for you, you're not enjoying it, it's going to give you cancer. I recognize this is rotting my brain, and any attempt to even speculate that there was anything useful in the news media, or if any useful thoughts or actions ever came from a politician, the only reason I would think that is due to brain damage.
Well, as Cornfed said, nothing is black and white. And, as you said, there's a few people out there who are messengers and reporters of the world they live in. But, what you were saying going south about the radio that's on Twitter, you said, I've seen the link you've posted about Davos. You see, I posted something that I'm sometimes a bit annoyed by those guys at the Duran, because they're a little bit too patronizing and a little bit too, but they were saying something very true in their in the thing I posted, is that the attendance to Davos this year is absolutely ridiculous compared to other years, and it's declining, especially coming from the powerful countries like China and India at the moment. And this kind of the West centered polarization of news. If you look at the map of the world and you see how many of the countries are involved in what we're talking about at the moment in the West, which is the Ukraine war, Davos, and things like that, you realize how narrow a view it is. And I'm not saying that it's not interesting to go and report on Davos. If you are interested in that and you feel that it's important to you, so much the better. But to the world itself now, Davos has lost total credibility and also impact and attendance. So it's something that, in my opinion, I would kind of not even look into, because it's nearly become irrelevant.
But I don't agree there, obviously. So
That's interesting. I'd like to hear what you have to
the
say.
Duran guys are brilliant on their core thing, which is reporting about the conflict with Russia and stuff. But like with everybody, they have their blind spots, and that dismissive piece about Davos, I think, wasn't their greatest work ever. The thing about the WEF and Davos is really that they are not Davos. They are the governments of the West, of North America and Europe, right? So nobody who went there this year disagreed strongly about the Davos or the Western agenda. And it's like you have to support only one part of the war in Ukraine, and you have to believe in this net zero crazy climate industrial plan. So it's interesting just in the sense that this is a free peek via YouTube into how these people that we call our leaders actually think when they when they think nobody's watching. That's not the right thing to say. When they think that that is the right thing to do, so you can sort of see them talk for 45 minutes or something about this great industrial plan for a green new Europe, and yeah, so it's all in the spirit of like Hornfed said, getting more angles and perspectives and sides to what you wonder about. For me personally, I was kind of curious about this talking point about the Great Reset. Great Reset is really just a another brand name for the old ESG score, the sustainability thing that the EU is planning its fourth industrial revolution along. So you can sort of cut away some misconceptions, like the Great Reset was about sort of resetting everybody with a virus. I think that was just an opportune way to brand Klaus Schwab's book, and it was the name of the 2020 WEF meeting or something. So it's really nothing else than this fake sustainability, because they perverted the concept of sustainability, ecological sustainability, back in the 1980s, and now they're going full steam and say that they will save the world by calling everything we do sustainable, right? So that's kind of the core hoax about the EU politics on climate.
But we already know it's all a hoax.
Not everybody knows that.
No, but everybody doesn't know anything. You pointed that out already. That even the climate acceptors in denial with obsessing about the climate, and basically, unless someone's seen through civilization, they don't know anything. So yeah, I don't, as in, if we know this stuff, we know this stuff. So like if you shed a light on the WAF, who's that helping? Or like, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, as I say, I think it's a form of entertainment, really. We're just entertaining ourselves, and it's curious. I know it's an entertaining drama, but what difference does that make then?
Yeah, but you have
Sometimes,
to remember.
though,
You have to remember that most people on this planet are scratching their heads when they hear about a group like ours that doesn't support the EU Green Agenda or the American Green Agenda. They have no clue why we would oppose that if we acknowledge the climate severity going on, right? So having sort of our own cult view that the best solution going forward is for everything to collapse, that is one thing. It's also interesting to see what is the alternative, what is the EU saying, how will they solve this, and now we can actually say with our hand on the Bible or on our chest that the same people who gave us COVID lockdowns are now giving us net zero climate politics, and why the fuck should you trust them, right? So that's the same that the right is saying, and if we are to be honest with ourselves, that is actually a key point, that we shouldn't trust them, right?
Yeah, but the point of that thing of the Duran was not just that there was poor attendance. It was saying that the real deciders and the real people who have a role to play internationally, like China and India at the moment, and some other, but mostly them and Russia, are not there anymore. You see, I think China had one minister sent, Russia nobody, India snobbed it, and those nations that are in Davos now, the old British Empire, the French, who think they're still a great nation, and the US who are collapsing, they still think that they are they are going to change, and they're going to be able to make decisions, that they have lost all their power. They have lost all their credibility, of course, but that doesn't that never existed anyway for me. But in terms of policies and applying them, they can do feck all anymore. And I mean, that's why this is a big bag of wind. The people who are there, England is fucked, France is fucked, Germany is on the decline. And those are the main what they call themselves, the West, the Alliance, whatever they still call them, but there's nothing there anymore. That's what the point I was interested in, and it would be maybe for another discussion, because we could continue on that if you like.
Yes, it was a very, very bad reportage by the Duran, but I can only say that because I know what they were talking about in Davos, right? You don't know that.
No, but I looked at the attendance after that because I was curious to see, and I looked at what happened 10 years ago there and 5 years ago, and I've looked at definitely some people are some very, very much more important people and who represent nations that have got more weight are not there anymore. That's just facts. Like, I'm not saying the Duran, yes, no, I don't want to go into a debate on that. I'm just looking at the facts. We all know that that we are living in collapsing collapsing societies worldwide, but what's happening in our countries is going much faster.
Yeah,
No?
I think the reason that what you're saying may be right about lower attendance and blah blah blah, is that over time, over the years, they are now at a point in Davos where they're doubling down, where they have decided everything, and so it's more like it's no big surprise this year compared to previous years about where they're going. So the environment side crashed when they chose to attack Russia. So now they're reopening coal-fired power stations and all kinds of things, and they have even declared natural gas to be green and ecological on their sustainability chart. So they're kind of doing desperate things and stretching the ecological sustainability concept to the max. But their course is laid, and they know where they want to go, and I think that's why people don't travel there from every capital in the world anymore, because it's already settled.
And I think that, I mean, I really agree with all that, but I think it's so important to kind of create a little distance between ascribing what we believe might be their goals or what they actually want. And I think that this also gets back to Bob. I mean, this is maybe, let me paint a brief picture on one reason to follow the news, maybe, I mean, if we really boil this down to data points, we know that there are people who we've never met up there on the stage saying stuff, and we know that they know that they are on that stage, so they have an audience. So they are saying things that they want that audience to hear. So it may not be in their heart of hearts or their desires or even truthful. It's the message they would like to put out. And I think, as everyone here observes, it's all marketing, because as Sophie mentioned, the attendance, it doesn't even matter who's there anymore. So we know it must be BS, but even that doesn't matter because we already see the policies playing out. Germany's getting onto coal, and none of that even matters because we can measure CO2 and methane, concentrations in the atmosphere. It's just, this has been on this track for a long time. All the rest of it is just marketing. It's just PR. Everything you hear at Davos is just PR, because the real track is scientifically observable and measurable, and we know it. And the climate is going to be a giant mess. So given that this is all just talk that is marketing, the nature of it is to influence the public. And this is the interesting part to me. The nature of governance is to use your populace as a weapon. A lot of the time it's to use them against each other so you can stay on top. Other times it's like the Ukraine conflict. You motivate your population to go to war. You know, if you want to watch out if you see other populations being motivated to go to war against you. And so it's just interesting to see what they're saying at Davos, because it's a tactic to move people in a direction that they like. So if they're up there saying all this, like, net zero sustainability stuff, you can see how they're trying to move people, or at least distract them from the reality that, this is fallen off a cliff quickly. And so I think that one reason to kind of pay attention to the news media is in order to watch out for threats as they're coming at you. A group like this, I think it's really important that we're careful and kind of paying attention to public opinion, because people are used as a weapon against each other. And that would be the thing to watch out for.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Everything you said there, really. Yeah, they're kind of, the EU, etc., von der Leyen and stuff. They're kind of painting themselves in this nice, kind, responsible adult kind of picture. And so that's sort of their PR game. But at the same time, they are actually restructuring the entire capitalist system within the EU with these sustainable taxonomy things for every activity that goes on in the union. So it is a big sort of accounting mess or hell, and I think Greta already pointed that out, that you can do false accounting and you can make everything look green, right? So I think she's kind of landed on the right understanding of things. But that's kind of what we have. America is sort of the bad guy when it comes to climate, and of course the previous head of Brazil, Bolsonaro, was, and the EU in this big scheme of things are sort of the good guys who are doing all the right things, quote unquote. I don't think they're right, but they're sort of the common sense good guys, the way I see it. And China, Russia, yeah, it's a big puzzle, and trying to understand everything is really, really hard, I think. Like, how does the Brazil fit into the larger BRICS kind of things? BRICS means South Africa, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And if there was kind of an agent provocateur storming of the Capitol building in Brazil last week, was that done by opponents of the BRICS cooperation between China, Russia, etc., or was it done by proponents? And what's the meaning of it all, and why are they doing this thing? Like Bob says.
Yeah, and I think we've just seen, just a state-of-the-art kind of class act, at least in the U.S., about the vilification of Russia. And the situation in Ukraine is very complicated. I'm not making any evaluations, but, it is kind of amazing how, the national voice has been united to vilify Russia and wish ill upon its people. Not unlike has kind of been on a low boil here about China. But,
they've been doing this for years, though, haven't they?
Yeah, it's just 1984,
Yeah, but that's all they've been vilifying Russia since the end of World War II, and then actually, if you look at it, they've been vilifying Russia since before World War II. So the West, such as it is, whatever that means, has always hated Russia, hasn't it? So there's always been an animosity, and then
well, they've had an interest in convincing their public to hate Russia, and to not look at their own misdeeds. So,
but it's the same old then, isn't it? Still, I mean, it's all the same. It's all just the same stuff. And maybe this is the same thing that happened when the first person built a fence around a field and said, this is mine, and got put some people to work there to generate a surplus or whatever. And the bullshit starts at that point or whatever, or before.
Can I ask you
I don't know what
guys?
to do with it.
You talked about Russia and how that was used. How do you guys and Sophie? How do you think that the China link to the pandemic is going to be used against China, and by whom? Which side of American politics or European is going to blame China for this? I'm not saying China is responsible at all. I don't think so. But
No, but this is the absurd thing, though, isn't it? This is what's so cuckoo, because like Fauci paid the Chinese to build a bioweapon. And it's entirely possible that the Americans will then blame the Chinese for releasing the bioweapon. Like, well, it's like,
yeah, but what part of America will claim that China did it? Which side of the politics?
whoever happens to be in
know,
office.
Okay.
when you're dealing with non-people systems like a nation or a corporation, you can just count on them to say whatever is most convenient to them at any point, regardless of the
Yes.
truth, right?
True.
So that's kind of generally a principle. They're just going to say whatever they find convenient in the moment. So it's complicated in the US because we're attached to China. We're the Western standard of living is propped up by Chinese manufacturing and all its global warming emissions. And there are elements in the US who find interest in castigating China because they want to spur their own interests in other parts of the world or within the US. And there are interests within the United States that cut against that in the other way. I think one thing that's interesting is that I think it's going to be challenging for anyone to try to gin up a war with China because that will decimate the US standard of living, which would decimate the will to war. So I think that there's a really complex relationship there that isn't true between the US and Russia, But I think it's really impossible to tell because the United States is warring factions of capitalists within its own border, right? So I can't give you a clean answer, Bob. But I would think that it all depends on how quickly global warming impacts onset. How quickly does abrupt global warming occur? Because if it's kind of slow, a dynamic may develop where we go to war with China. If it's kind of fast.
Oh no, we can't not go to war with China. I bought my tickets already.
It'll be quite a spectacle. Plenty of shock and awe. But if it goes fast, then I think the ability to project war is going to be decimated, and so everyone's going to look inside and deal with their own cancer.
I mean, doesn't the Chinese just have to stop making stuff for the rest of us, and that's the end of that? How can anyone go to war with China? It seems like an absurd notion. If you're gonna,
it's
guys,
pretty smart.
I forgot to mention the petrodollar collapse. That is a very key piece to this puzzle. It's going to collapse in a year or two or whatever, and then everything will change as the West relates to the East. So what do you guys think about that?
I think that's super important. I totally agree. I think that the economy is a zero-sum game, though, and I think there's some complexity, especially with the size of the U.S. military, because as it collapses, it's going to kind of collapse the world economy, not just the U.S. economy. But yeah, I think it's a huge dynamic. Sorry to cut you off, Sophie. Go ahead.
I was just saying the same thing as you. I was saying, that's a very important thing, the collapse of the petrodollar. So I didn't have any comments, but I would just, at the same time you said it's very important, that's what I thought. That's all.
But let me ask, just to further your question, if we all kind of agree it's such an important dynamic, I had thought, with peak oil and such that, this was coming, but now I'm not as sure. It looks to me like we're just going to drill, baby, drill until we all drown in hurricanes. That's the best I can figure out. So
100%.
Why would the petrodollar collapse? And, I think it is quite possible, but I'm a little more worried about weather disruption and food supply disruption anymore. So I guess I'm kind of curious. Do you see manufacturing being undercut by a petrodollar collapse, or
No, but
will the
take the dollar collapse first, because what's new since the last Davos is the Russian, Chinese, Ukrainian situation, and these big world island states, they are clearly not having any problem going outside of America and outside of the dollar when they trade, for gas and oil and all kinds of things. So that is why there is going to be a petrodollar collapse, not due to oil running out or anything like that, but just because people in Asia don't need the dollar anymore. And
yeah
whatever reason why it happens, it's going to happen, and that means that most of the value, the artificial value of the dollar is disappearing, and then we can discuss what then happens till the cows come home.
yeah? Given that scenario, I think you'll see the U.S. military in a lot more places. Unfortunately, because just like Ukraine, we'd rather blow it up than let someone else have it.
Oh, fuck yeah, without a doubt that's going to happen. The Americans are going to have a tantrum and blow everything up that they can afford to blow up while they still
And the
have.
more things
If they
we
haven't
blow
run
up,
out
the
of
more it
weapons.
supports our economy.
Yeah, well, the GDP goes up, doesn't it? The more fucking weapons you buy. But yeah, but aren't they running out at the moment? Aren't they? Haven't they? Because they've had to take some armaments from Israel to Ukraine, because the demand for for blowing up stuff equipment is so high. So maybe maybe it's not as unlimited as we think it is.
I think that to some degree, the international diversity of arms supply, though, is kind of a mirage. I mean, it's the same companies, you know what I mean? But, or the same
No, but yeah,
investors,
but it's been stockpiled
yeah.
in that neighborhood, and so they've been. So it depends, maybe they're sort of, and again, everything depends on the Chinese manufacturing stuff. So if the Chinese stop manufacturing stuff, that's game over anyway, isn't it? For the power of America.
Well, that will remove any hesitancy from the U.S. getting involved with war with China. So I think, just like Sun Tzu in The Art of War, China has been very smart about kind of bringing, keeping their friends close, but their enemies even closer by becoming enmeshed with the U.S. We dampen our risk to them and tie us to them,
Yeah, but that doesn't mean the US isn't stupid enough to start a war in some way, I suppose. I
You
mean,
certainly
I
have a point.
tend to think the Chinese are, they're a lot more, a lot more intelligent and worldly than the Americans could ever be, I would imagine. But again, who knows what the games are? For all we know, they're all having a laugh. They're all, whoever it is who gets to make things happen in America, we don't know who they are, because the people with the fucking megaphones and podiums aren't those people. So whoever it is who makes something occur might be in a hotel private room somewhere with the Chinese equivalent, having a cigar and a brandy together or whatever. And we don't know, do we? We're none the wiser. So yeah, it's just like, the Chinese hold dollars, so the Chinese could fuck the dollar, as far as I understand, by just asking for their money back. But again, I can't remember all the details of all that stuff because my eyes glaze. But yeah, I don't know. If the Chinese or the BRICS, if they talk about setting up an alternate currency, yeah, again, it's like, we don't know what's going on really. So yeah, it's just entertaining, isn't it? It's just entertainment. That's all. I don't know what else.
It is entertainment, and but isn't it good that on this platform we can talk about news that we all gather, and we can get quite a good picture of what's going on, because some people are looking into it, some people are reflecting on it. We get little snippets, so I mean that's enough for my little brain, I mean, I can't handle too much at the same time anyway. I mean, I don't have a brain like some of you or Lord Hugh could process, I think, a whole encyclopedia in a day. But, you know, these little Sunday meetings, when the subjects are not more spiritual or based on other problems, we spend a good bit of time on current affairs. And if I look back on the last few meetings, it's been quite interesting, really, because we are not drowning in the daily news, but we're getting a bit of and different countries who are giving information. So it's not a bad platform to be on, this Dance Macabre, isn't it? Now, I was a question for you going south. Why do you call, I mean, I just looked at your stream there earlier, and why do you call the thing Versailles? Can you explain? Because I'm not, I don't get it.
No, it's because the planet is speaking through me, so I'm using my senses. I'm using my insight into the future and to the past.
But what does it
And
do with
it's not a rational thing that you can just sit there in Ireland and ask about. You know, it's a larger, more complex thing.
But why is it called Versailles? Versailles and the court of the Sun King. Why?
You can't ask that question. It's a too simple question, and I already gave you the answer.
Can't ask the question. Okay. All right. Okay. Fine. So, someone else?
Spiritual bit, it sounds like. But yeah. I was curious, DB, I totally agree. You know, again, like these capitalists are just kind of, you know, elevating themselves while trying to trip each other if they can, just for fun, basically. You know, just trying to see who will collapse first, as the developing world already collapsed and they already did that. But what is this Milliways doctrine? I did a quick Google and couldn't find it, but you know, I'm kind of curious about the name of this, the doctrine of the warring band of brothers. Ah, I'll have to look for that. Thanks for the reference. Appreciate it.
I'm not sure I got.
Oh, okay. Now, yeah, sorry, that hit me as well.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, in the chat. My bad. Yeah, I agree. I just kind of see, especially with it looks like extreme weather is going to be the thing, not lack of energy. And so I think these guys are just trying to position themselves. And if they can, it's safer for them to kind of knock each other off. But by
You
and
mean we're
large,
going to
just
starve
maintain.
before we freeze to death?
Yeah, if it all goes cold, yeah. Or wet bulb, who knows?
Oh, wet bulb I can live with. I'm happy to die that way.
Just going outside in the sauna suit,
Yep.
You know, I listened to this John Zerzan's weekly radio program, and he actually got a caller who asked about the sabotage of the power line substation thing in North Carolina, South Carolina, whatever. And I figured out because John Zerzan himself, he was totally on square one. He was like quoting the mainstream media from day one of the event, talking about this drama queen event that had to be shut down by taking out the power, blah blah. So I figured out that our show, the Extinctionati, was like 2 months ahead of Zerzan when it came to that kind of an event. So maybe we should pride ourselves by that, and having at least some out of the box thoughts about sabotage, which used to be Zerzen's and his eco-saboteur clique's main thing. That he is actually 2 months behind a random group like this one when it comes to analyzing what's going on in his own country. It's kind of strange.
And to come back to the Milliway's doctrine, it comes from the book The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. You know, the book that Hugh was referring very often to it. And it was that sort of idea that DB has developed a little bit, but it was it was about the end of the universe, basically. So the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was the first one, and The Restaurant at the End of the Universe is the other one. And so it's a funny wink, so reference to that book of fiction too, you know.
I loved Hitchhiker's Guide.
Restaurant, wasn't it?
Sorry?
Wasn't Milliways was the name of the restaurant in The Restaurant at the End of the Universe?
I think it was, yeah.
I'll have to pick that up. Curious, yeah. And getting back to going south, what you were saying, yeah, it's really fascinating to me to try to gauge the internal instability of something like China or something like Russia or something like the US. It's always really, I think this has been the game of the elite since forever, since the Russian Revolution at least, is to try to figure out like how unstable is it? And it's always kind of a guess. I think it always creeps up on you. I've heard a lot of accounts that China is very unstable, but I wouldn't know. And I certainly feel like the US is probably the most unstable, but again, I don't really know how to compare that. I think that since the Ukraine war, there's been a lot of people trying to encourage Russians to revolt, but I don't see any of that catching on. But it sure seems to me like the US is internally very unstable. And I think that's something that trying to pay attention to the news might be able to help inform if you listen to it with the right ears, but I don't know.
It seems to me that you are right that, especially when it comes to what America is going to do, either Biden or Trump or whatever, what they are going to do about China and the pandemic, it's kind of random and it's kind of free, with no connection to what really happened or to any truth about the biolabs and stuff. I think we can just expect that they will do whatever, like you said, and then they will just fabricate some kind of reason for doing what they want to do anyway afterwards, after the fact. So the only thing we do know is that they do have a biolab in Wuhan, in China, and there was a virus outbreak, and I don't even know how many people care about how that came to be, and maybe most people are just waiting around for America to send missiles. I don't know.
Sorry, it started to dawn on me the possibility that Cornfed hasn't read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is a far more important revelation than anything else that has passed. Only
Yep.
the first part.
Not the entire series, but yeah.
Okay. Well, you just ever so slightly vindicated yourself there.
Thank goodness. It belongs in the canon, Western literature.
Yeah, I think so.
Quite good stuff. I mean, it amazes me how much great literature is kind of either around the edges or about this kind of thing. I love Catch-22, Animal Farm, 1984, Fahrenheit. I mean, holy cow, so many great muses. Kind of makes me just agape.
Bless the artists, bless the creators, because these books like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but all the other ones you've mentioned and so many others are there around the corner for us.
It took me a long time to come around to that, but yeah.
And Hugh's book, even though I mean you can say whatever you like in terms of okay, it's not been read much and it's got a lot of details on his theories and stuff like that, but it's a book that's got so much in it. It of course I'm not going to compare it with it's not comparable because we're not objective anyway in this group, but yeah, there is a that's a it's a much better how do you say that? It's a much better approach to our world to go into the world of imagination. I always think that. I always think that because that's where we're getting the real message. I think myself.
Where can I find Hugh's book? I'm a, newcomer here.
It used to be on Amazon, but I don't know. Is it still on sale since he passed? I don't know. Do they stop these things? I'm not sure. That's a writer's question to a writer.
It's still there.
I have a digital copy. I have
Ooh.
it on my laptop. So if ever you want to just message me, and I will share it with you. No problem.
That's the link anyway. But yeah.
Yeah.
Who's getting the money if you buy it?
I think there's something that it stopped. Like, I'm not sure now. I'm not sure, but somebody told me that they couldn't buy it anymore.
It's still on the UK one anyway.
All right.
Oh, it's on Amazon as well in United States of America.
Yeah. Also, if it can still be.
Anyway, Sophie can send you a free one. That's even better, isn't it?
Yeah. I have it. I have it. Yeah, I have it. I know where it is, so I can upload it to Drive, to Google Drive, and I'll share it with whoever. Just message me and or email me or whatever you like, and I'll send it to you. It's nice to read it again now, and sometimes I just don't read it again, but I open it and I go through different things and I get caught in the story again. But it was really a pre-manifesto, his book. But the spirit of it is kind of nice because it's actually a very doomer and uplifting. That's what really struck me with it. But the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is of the same nature, but it's even more, but there's much more symbolism than Hugh's book is a novel, but it's deeply anchored in reality, fiction, but it's deeply anchored in reality. And I think a lot of his characters are people that he knows too, and as described. Yeah, not go much further.
Yeah, I tried to pay for it on Amazon, but there was some kind of technical glitch, so I got the book and I wasn't able to pay. So that's sometimes that's how capitalism works, because strange things happen.
Yeah, that's what I thought, because I think I tried to get it a while back for somebody and I couldn't buy it, and I thought maybe his account is gone now that he's deceased, and there is probably
No, but this was a long time ago, while he was still around, and
all right, okay.
It was more like me wanting to have the digital book on the right application or on the right computer, basically, because sometimes you don't think about it, you download it to a different thing or an iPad or whatever, but you don't really want to read it on that. And
okay,
details.
but if you have somebody who could really answer your questions, and you can get him through email, is Gary, because Gary collaborated in the editing of the book, and I'm not sure what was his place in the publishing part, but he was greatly involved in the book, so he might be able to give you more information on that.
Yeah, but I'm fine now. It's just that I wasn't able to pay Amazon. So when is Gary coming back to the show? You know anything? Sophie?
Yeah, he's not sure. He has talked about a few things. We're just at an early stage now. He's emerging from a few difficult personal things, like Mike, for example, at the moment too, who has to deal with change of place and circumstances and work and all sorts of things. But yeah, he's talking about it. He hasn't given any date. I contacted him because we were coming close to the anniversary of Hugh's death, and I know how much he is still grieving and sad about that. So I wanted to see a bit where he was, and that's what he said. He said he was considering maybe coming back one day, but he doesn't want to say when or how yet. But he's not completely out of the loop. He's just extremely busy with family matters and himself to look after. But it's very easy to get in touch with him by email because he really responds and usually he takes his time for that. So there's absolutely, it's just that he's not ready for the meetings yet.
Right. That reminds me because, in the same general area, we have these Just Collapse people so that we met twice last year with. And, maybe, I don't know, maybe before Gary returns, we could maybe have like another meeting with Just Collapse because they have different experiences with people in this collapse on the other side of the planet, and I'm pretty sure they have things that we haven't worked so much on. Yeah. So what do you say? Is that interesting? Because we are very Western centric in this group, I think.
I would just say I'd be curious. Sounds like fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I think DB is asking about their review of Ripeness as a Whole.
Review of a video, or I'm not sure they reviewed single episodes.
And hey, Bob, it was good seeing you on.
I think when we met with them, we mentioned it all right. I don't remember sending it myself to them, but maybe we put the link on the comments. I don't know what we were doing during that meeting. It's a long time ago. But the conversation, if my memory is good, with them was much more practical. And even though we were not, we tried to stir the conversation sometimes to our kind of perspective and our spiritual perspective. It didn't go very far. So if ever they came back, it could be a good platform to start on, really, to exchange on our visions of life and of ripeness at this stage of our predicament, you know.
Yes, I think also we are kind of moving closer very fast to the need for the kind of collapsed local economies, or how they phrased it, to have a kind of local self-help thing about it, like they do in the global south. You know, when climate comes crashing down on everyone, and the supplies stop coming into the shops. Maybe that is something they work more on. Just the last time. So,
Yeah, the scripts were talking about networking, and they were very active in that line, especially where they live in Tasmania, don't they? So they have quite a wild country there. If they and there's has to probably a tradition of localization that's going back a long time. But they were very interesting. They were nice people. Yes, the talk was very profound, and I liked it. I liked it. I think, guys, that I'm going to have to say goodbye soon. I don't know if you realize, but we're nearly 3 hours into the meeting.
I know. Yeah. So timing wise, maybe I can make a first contact now, and then after we ourselves are done with the anniversary thing, then we can think
well, we
about
can
having,
talk. Yeah. Well, we could talk
having
about the anniversary thing next time. It doesn't really. We don't have time to do this now. Really.
No, that's okay. Fine with me.
All right. So, do you want me to conclude? Okay.
Oui.
Oui, merci. So thank you everyone for being here tonight, and we have touched on plenty of things that are disturbing, interesting, sometimes cool, sometimes frightening, but we might as well let all that go because nothing really matters, and we might stay in silence for a few minutes if you don't mind. Om Paratmane Nama Iti. Goodbye, and I will give you a little bit of bell to say goodbye.
Bye and take care. Take care, everybody.
Take care.